Today, good morning, Excellencies, to distinguished panelists and experts, ladies and gentlemen, joining us from Cambodia and overseas. Welcome to our public-private dialogue on unpacking the RCEP agreement, public-private dialogue number 2. This dialogue number 2 will be on the RCEP rules of origin and what they mean for Cambodia. My name is Sven Calvo. I'm an international trade consultant at ERIA, and I will be sharing today's moderation with Mr. Jeremy Gross, who is the Director of Capacity Building at ERIA. You all know that the RCEP marks the establishment of a free trade agreement with 15 states. RCEP creates new business opportunities and changes the shape of trade in the region. For Cambodia only, it is expected that RCEP will boost our gross domestic product by an additional 2%, increase export by an extra 7.3%, and raise investment by an added 23.4%, according to the Ministry of Commerce. Under the RCEP deal, the Kingdom will also receive preferential treatment for many important items, such as raw and processed agricultural products, as well as industrial goods. But the agreements and the provisions are only as good as they're implemented, meaning that the businesses, those who are actually trading, need to be aware of the opportunities and be able to seize them. So this capacity building program is organizing a series of 5 public-private dialogue called Unpacking the RCEP Agreement, What They Mean for Cambodia. This is the second dialogue. The first dialogue took place in November and focused on electronic commerce provisions. This second dialogue will focus on rules of origin that determines which goods originate from RCEP member country can benefit from preferential trade treatment. As RCEP consolidates the rule of origin by making it easier for export to accumulate and rely on a single proof of origin, it will also facilitate, hopefully, the cross-border trade and speed up delivery amongst RCEP countries. So allow me, first of all, to give a warm welcome to His Excellency Sim Sokeng, Secretary of State of the Ministry of Commerce, who will very soon introduce and open the workshop for today. Before we do this, I'd like to share with you the agenda for this morning's session, and I will share my screen to do so. So today's session will take us from 9 to approximately 11. We will start with opening remarks from His Excellency Sim Sokeng, Secretary of State of the Ministry of Commerce, and Mr. Jeremy Gross, the Director of the Capacity Building at ERIA. We'll have a first session introducing the SEED about what RCEP means, what the provisions on rule of origins are, and practically how they can be applied in RCEP countries, but more specifically in Cambodia. We will have a second session on the private sector perspective on opportunities for Cambodia in RCEP, especially focusing on rules of origin. That will be moderated by my friend Jeremy Gross. This will be followed by a question and answer with the audience. As usual, feel free to use the Q&A box to write your questions. You can do that anonymously or with your name. And finally, we have the immense pleasure of having His Excellency Dr. Soksipana, the Senior Advisor to the Royal Government of Cambodia, as our guest today. Thank you, Doctor, for joining us today, who will provide a summary of discussions and takeaway on this workshop and what it means for Cambodia and what else could be done to accelerate the perusal of rules of origin by Cambodian traders and exporters. With this, I would like to introduce His Excellency Sim Sokeng, who will give us the pleasure of his opening remark. His Excellency began his government career at the Ministry of Commerce in 1998. It's 24 years ago. He has served the Ministry of Commerce management level since 2003, initially as the Deputy Head of Division, then from 2008 as Deputy Director of the Intellectual Property Department, and early 2012, I had the pleasure of having His Excellency as my supervisor as the Acting Director of the Department of International Cooperation. In January 2015, he was appointed as the Director of the Department of Intellectual Property. In May 2016, he was appointed as Director General of International Trade in the MOC. And in early November 2018 as Undersecretary of State of the Ministry of Commerce, and finally in June 2020 as Secretary of State of the Ministry of Commerce. He's of course been involved in this capacity in several regional and bilateral trade negotiation as chief negotiator. He used to be the CEO for Cambodia, member of the Interministerial Committee to update the Cambodia trade strategy 2013-2018 and 2019-2023, and draft a number of laws and amended laws. And of course, His Excellency is teaching in a number of leading Cambodian university, Panasias University, University of Law and Economics, and the Royal University of Phnom Penh. Excellency, welcome again. Thank you for joining us and giving us the pleasure of these opening remarks. Excellency, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Swan, for good introduction to me. I'm very pleased to participate in this morning dialogue. And please let me, first of all, respect to my senior, His Excellency Dr. Soktipana, who are also involved and used to work here. He's like in Japanese because Senpai, very senior one on this one. Respect to him. And after that, my friend Jeremy, who are used to work together when I was DG. He's very good and helping us a lot, as well as in personal and also as bring ERIA as a whole together. And also to Deborah, she is very active in RCEP. I'm very like her and support her, and I also used to listen to her during the negotiation as well. She are very what we call the pro making RCEP moving, as well as give something that okay, this room that RCEP should be improved. Something is very good. I'm really delighted to have her. That the organizer able to have her today as well. And also Robin, who are also the negotiator. I'm pleased to see you, this one. And also Clint, who are legal practice in here. And my colleague, Mr. Chantha, who are also joining the negotiation team for also from Cambodian as well. And old friend Swan, who are very good moderator. I believe you can do well today to make us. And before I start, I really appreciate so much for the area and also the organizer able to bring not only the expert but also the negotiator who are in the table of negotiating today and able to bring. I see the number here is over 100 audience. Hope that you're able to enjoy this dialogue this morning. Let me try the best to read what my colleague doing for me. And I also, first of all, very good morning to all. And at the outset, I wish to warm welcome you all to this dialogue on rural origin. As some of you already mentioned, this is the second time. On the first one, I have opportunity to open as well. And it's very exciting that we doing on e-commerce. E-commerce very important. And now also very technical chapter under the rural origin. So I'm strongly happy to see this come up on the good time. And this is the thing that I really appreciate. And without ERIA and OSET to support, I don't believe that it will be able to meet each other today. And also thank to my colleague at the MOC who try to facilitate and also contribute to this one. I really appreciate ERIA and OSET for continue. Not only this, the first one is many workshop, many activity that we already do together, including the public capacity building for our government officer in ministry as well, and also the other ministry. And the area still very actively support during our chairmanship as well. And I also happy because this is a very good public awareness, compensate on what the ministry already doing. I may bring up some what we already do to share with you as well. But before I go in that, I just want to tell you that I believe that all of you know, also for Cambodian, we already entered into force from the 1st January. So over a month and 10 days already for this one. And this is really important as this is the biggest the FTA in the world and account over 70% of population, even repeat the number, but at least to give us some notion from the beginning. And this is also really a single, we can say simple word is single book for business in the region able to use. And I also believe that it is really good momentum to integration the regional and as well as the global value chain to support, and especially during this pandemic time, COVID time, not only Cambodian, I believe other countries may really need this one, this RCEP to moving forward. Like I mentioned that just give you a few examples that what our doing and our achievement on this RCEP. It also surprising us that when the Ministry of Commerce as well as TTRI, Swan Novel, he also held on that. We are posting the iTrade bulletin, and on that there are also a Telegram channel who are pick up only one page because we brief a very long one few page, and later on we make a graphic only one page on RCEP. Especially for benefit, and we put the QR code who are able to scan and access to get the legal text as in Khmer language and also in English language, and all the schedule everything there, and as well as a few page for sum up the benefit of all the chapter there. Immediately, just only 69 hours, we got about 100,000 views via the Telegram channel. So it is surprising us as well that many of Cambodian people are interested in this RCEP and really eager to know. So just less than 3 days, we get over 100 views on this one. And this is the interesting point I want to bring in. And also another point is the Ministry of Commerce, my colleague here already who are supporting us here. He also his team also drafted the export operation guideline. You can access to the website. Our website very simple one is co.moc.gov.kh. So you can download all the document there, and you also can use this for apply for your CO online as well. So this is what we already do there, and everything document are also available there. So this is the thing that I just want to point out. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, based on the area, even this is a little bit old study, but it is very meaningful for Cambodian by the area showing that our export could be increased additional to 7.6%. And boost our GDP 2%, and as well as the investment 23%. We also did some the new study again to after negotiation as well. I believe that maybe in coming month area may publishing that soon. So this is the good sign, the good study, and also now we come down to the practical one, what we are doing today. So how we able to utilize. And this is the most important. We see this is a good number, but come at the end of the day is the private sector. So what we see, this is the benefit. So how we use, and if we ask how we use the rule of origin, we can see that it is come into the very important player. And if we are unable to reach meet the rule of origin, I make a simple word meet the origin, so we cannot enjoy, we cannot utilize it well. So this is very important. So you may see that in our public announcement in this December last year, that we announced to the public that Cambodia going to enter into force 1st January. In that, we already assigned the people, director and also deputy director from Import-Export Department as well as from Asia Pacific Department to provide them any user who wish to know about the procedure for export. As well as the legal, so the legal because Asia Pacific who also handle the tech as a whole, so they are there. And at the same time, we also assign the people in charge to support anybody wish to understand more about the CO rule of origin as well, with by providing the telephone as well as their email address, so they can be private sector or any user can be access to them. So as the Swan mentioned, as a chief negotiator, and I reiterate that Ministry of Commerce always regard the private sector is a backbone and the engine of our economic growth. So the private sector play very important key role to make it happen, and use the what we try our best, not only negotiation but our resource a lot to reach to this point. And under the strategic framework that we just announced in last December as well, we also putting the private sector a very important partner. And in that, you may see that Cambodian GDP going to grow, even some also show beyond their old prediction. So this is the good sign that we able to move our economy. And the more important, we want to see more and more of also using utilize. So today, this is a very good time for the dialogue. Even ROO is difficult, but I believe that our expert able to provide us in deep the key concept and the idea and how the proof of origin, product specification, or anything for all of you today. And I also would like to encourage all the audience here to discuss or question more the expert and also the negotiator who used to be there to learn more and able to smooth and fully utilization of the RCEP. I believe that our expert will show you that RCEP is not simple. The tariff line, we have 37 separate tariff schedule. So 37, this is a very lot one. And I believe that all of you, all of the experts maybe see that rule may be very helpful, because one rule go to 15 countries. So this is the very good one, and maybe could be say that it may be faster and easy for the custom, the go through the custom as well. And I believe the expert will may tell you touch on how CTA, CTC, something like that, who make it smooth. So by back this one, we see that SME may have to catch up all this idea or concept. But I believe this workshop today may help at least open starting point, and maybe next we can go on more. I hope that the OSA as well as the ERIA will support us to have another workshop and maybe more specific on some area as well. And you may see that from speak in under the Ministry of Commerce, we already have our officer, and I believe our officer will stand ready to support private sector to provide specific concern. And as you already have, I believe that you already have their telephone and email address. Please go to knock their door and asking them any question related to RCEP, for your interest for export, to use this opportunity as much as you can. So don't lose the time without utilize. The other country, they are very actively doing the same to encourage their private sector to use this RCEP. You may see that some already very actively push for the export, because they are eager waiting for the moment. I may not take you for a long time. Ladies and gentlemen, I may wish to conclude my opening remark here, and again to express my sincere thanks to ERIA and also OSA, as well as my colleagues who are even we are a small team, small resource, but they are very active to support and make this dialogue happen today. I wish all the organizers and also participants have a good health, and also done affected by the COVID, and please stay safe and healthy. With this remark, may I declare the workshop officially open, and wish you all have a fruitful discussion. Thank you so much. Back to you, Swan.
Thank you, Excellency. Thank you very much for setting the scene and for the call for actions for not only a government official in the Ministry of Commerce, but also for the private sector to be upfront and to take advantage of all these facilities and tools that you have created in the ministry. Thank you again, Excellency, and I'd like to invite Mr. Jeremy Gross, the Director of Capacity Building at ERIA, to take the floor. Before that, I'd like to mention that for those of you who still don't know Jeremy, and there are very few people who don't know Jeremy, Jeremy is an innovative development specialist with 20 years of experience of developing and implementing high-value international donor-funded programs. He's been working in ERIA since 2015 and serving since 2017 as Director of Capacity Building. And obviously, he had a long experience before ERIA, working with a diverse range of civil organizations, civil society organizations, and a variety of political environment in Southeast Asia, in South and Central Asia. And he worked obviously with many different ministries, state institutions, parliament, and international networks. Jeremy, over to you for your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sven. His Excellency Soksifana, Senior Advisor to the Royal Government of Cambodia, Excellency Simsok Heng, Secretary of State, Ministry of Commerce, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to you all. On behalf of the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia, ERIA, it gives me great pleasure to be with you here this morning. And once again, it is an honor to co-host this event with the Ministry of Commerce and to share this platform, virtual platform, with Excellency Simsok Heng. Excellency, can I thank you for your warm and generous opening comments. So the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is now a reality, and one that my organization, ERIA, has been a firm believer in since it was conceived. Through its long years, the long years of its inception, ERIA has been supporting RCEP's development through our research, dialogue, supports for the Trade Negotiating Committee. Our first publication on RCEP goes all the way back to 2013. And it's been followed by numerous studies on such as the benefits of mega FTAs, the benefits of RCEP for regional consolidation, the importance of RCEP for example, increasing transparency in relation to non-tariff measures, or for opening up services. And as Excellency Simsok Heng mentioned, there was also an area study that did cite the positive economic outcomes of RCEP. The capacity building program itself, which is an important way of linking area research and expertise with government officials, has also been a very important way to share area findings and understandings about RCEP over the years. Indeed, I found out that the very first capacity building seminar about RCEP happened to be in Phnom Penh in October 2013. So Excellency, perhaps you were at the Sofitel for that. So over the last 2 years, though, as it's become clear that RCEP was moving from the realm of a difficult dream to a reality, the capacity building program has refocused its activities to be in line with providing practical support for the implementation of RCEP. And of course, we know that RCEP since the 1st of January is now in force. So we've been pleased to develop activities around structural transformation related to RCEP, work on the rules of origin, tariff schedules, and undertaking a regulatory analysis of existing laws and commitments around the e-commerce chapter of RCEP. RCEP will continue to be a priority of ERIA as we move forward, and we'll be looking at issues such as investments and services. And of course, we'll be continuing this public-private dialogue series, which, as Sven mentioned earlier, this is actually the second of 5 public-private dialogues. Excellency, you mentioned in your opening comments how the private sector really is the backbone of the economy. We agree, and ultimately it is only if the private sector gains benefit from the various chapters of the RCEP agreement that we can call it a success. So we are very pleased to be able to co-host this event today. Although it is about an issue which is very technical in nature, it is important to start a conversation about it. Sustained outreach to the private sector about RCEP is essential. So I was actually very excited to hear in your comments earlier that, you know, within hours of posting information about the benefits of RCEP on a trade portal, I think you mentioned there are already over 100,000 views of that page. So it shows there really is a real thirst for information about RCEP and to make make the most of it. So ERIA certainly is here to support, and very much looking forward to continuing our cooperation with the Ministry of Commerce to make sure these benefits can be gained. So today's event is part of this outreach, and I'm very pleased that we are joined today by experts, Excellency Soxifana, Dr. Deborah Elms, Anchanthra, Chris O'Connell, Robin Flint, and Sven Kallebo. Thank you all very much for participating in today's event. And can I also thank the Australian government for their support of the capacity building programme. And also express my thanks to the Australian Embassy in Cambodia for their ongoing support of the capacity building programme. Finally, may I pass on my thanks to all of you who are watching this event, zooming in. And I do hope that you find this is a very helpful and important dialogue. On that, can I wish you all the best for today's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thanks very much for raising the interest of all our audience and definitely of our speakers. Thanks for that. With this, I suggest we move to our first session, which is on setting the scene, on explaining, demystifying what the RCEP rules of origin provisions are. And to do so, we have invited Dr. Deborah Elms, the founder and CEO of the Asian Trade Center. Asian, as you can see here on the screen, is ASAIN. And we have also invited Mr. Unchanta, who is the Director of Export-Import Department at the Ministry of Commerce, to provide a description of how the ministry has set itself fit for purpose on helping businesses to take advantage of the rules of origin. Just a word of introduction, Dr. Deborah is the founder and is the director of the Asian Trade Center. The Asian Trade Center works with governments and companies to design better trade policies for the region. Dr. Elms is the president of the Asia Business Trade Association, ABTA in short. She also served on the Trade and Investment Council of the World Economic Forum from 2017 to 2019, on the International Technical Advisory Committee of the Global Trade Professional Alliance, GTPA, and she was the chair of the Working Group on Trade Policy and Law. For those of you who are not familiar with the work of the Asian Trade Center, Dr. M publishes a very nice blog called Talking Trade Blog for us trade nerds, which I encourage you to have a look, because Dr. Deborah updates and posts regular articles on this. With this, Deborah, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here, and thank you for the warm words of welcome. I would say that one of the most impressive things actually about Cambodia is the ability of the government to be forward-looking on RCEP in particular, but also in all of these kinds of dialogues. A trade agreement is lovely, and I'm delighted that we have one, but if it sits in a drawer, it's useless. So the only way that we actually get the benefits of a trade agreement is if people actually use the agreement, if they know what's in it and if they're ready to use it. And I'm really pleased that Cambodia has been so far in front of many governments in the region in trying to get this information into the hands of businesses and making it accessible and user-friendly. So I think that's fantastic. And I'm delighted to be here to talk about, and I'm going to start sharing my screen, so just give me 1 second. I'm delighted to be here to talk about rules of origin. And rules of origin, I will tell you, is a sort of good news, bad news story. The good news is that there are lots of benefits that are available to you for trade in goods. And there are the ability of Cambodian companies to plug into markets across the region is fantastic. The bad news is that this is complicated. And so I unfortunately have to go into some of the details, otherwise it will be too complicated for all of you to follow along. So apologies for making this complicated, but it is what it is. Okay, so let me go into the RCEP rules of origin for you. So first, there are 15 members in RCEP, but only 11 are currently in use, with Malaysia starting next next month. So we are still missing, just for those of you keeping track, we are still waiting for Myanmar, Philippines, and Indonesia, but all of the rest of Asia is now part of RCEP, and you can start taking advantages of RCEP benefits this afternoon if you're that inspired. I think that's very useful. Now, where did it come from? It came from ASEAN's original, what they call the ASEAN plus ones, like ASEAN China. Many of you may be familiar with ASEAN's internal structure and the use of ASEAN preferential certificates, Form E, but also certificates that you use to trade with China or to trade with Korea, et cetera. So RCEP looks like that, but it also has some distinct differences. And so it's useful if you're used to doing inter-ASEAN trade or trade between ASEAN and the dialogue partners like China, but recognize that RCEP is different. And so there's some variation here, new materials that you need, new rules that apply to you. So you'll have to pay attention to RCEP. And I'm really happy that the Cambodian government has devoted individuals and technical assistants to you as companies to help you navigate what is a really challenging agreement in some ways to sort of understand, especially if this is not what you do for a living. So all of the texts and schedules are available. I happen to use the one from New Zealand, but all of the members have them, and please do read the text and the schedules. We had the 5 original agreements, and then what happened? They said, well, let's get all 15 of us, at the time we also had India, 16 countries together, let's create an agreement that links together Asia in ways that we haven't seen before. Now that proved to be challenging, and that's why it took so long, and that's why you had so many government officials who were busy with RCEP for a long time, because they had to try to figure out not just what could ASEAN do with its dialogue partners, but critically, what could the dialogue partners do with each other? So you may know that we have some tensions in Northeast Asia between Japan and Korea and China. They had no existing agreements between each other. That was very complicated. India was very challenging. And the net result of that for you as a business is we have complicated tariff reductions. So there are 37 different tariff schedules. Many of them are a bit complicated. They can be very long time horizons. And so that is a challenge. And I'm not going to lie, that can be complicated. What is useful, though, is that we have one rule of origin. So although all of the governments may have made their own schedules for their own products, they gave one rule, and the rule applies to everyone. So like most trade agreements, or all trade agreements, you don't get the benefits of RCEP, the lower tariff benefits of RCEP, because you happen to be Cambodian, because you are sending something from Cambodia to another RCEP country. You only get the benefits if you follow the rules and if you apply to say to the government at customs, I am following the rules and I'm asking you for the benefits that are on offer to me. So this is not automatic. It's not that everything that Cambodia exports to RCEP countries automatically get lower tariffs. No, you have to show that you qualify, that you've followed the rules, you've qualified, you have the certificate of origin, the piece of paper to certify this for you. Then you get those benefits in terms of lower tariffs. So this discussion today, and I apologize because it's going to get very technical very quickly, is important because, again, you can't get lower tariffs if you don't follow the rules. So you have to understand what those rules are. You have to understand how they apply to your business and how they apply to where you want to send the product. So that then you understand what am I getting out of this? How much money can I save? How many new markets can I access? Requires you to understand first, what are the rules that I need to use in order to apply? So let me go into this in a bit more detail. I'm going to start with something complicated. Now, I apologize for that, but sometimes when things are complicated, the benefits are actually bigger. So because we have lots of restrictions in complicated areas, an agreement like RCEP actually makes it better for you to trade. So I'm going to talk about cookies. And I'm going to talk about cookies first, and then I'm going to talk briefly about textiles. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have along the way. So one of the challenges that producers of food have is that they often have high barriers to trade. And this, I think, may be familiar with any of you who are trying to sell Cambodian raw materials, especially raw materials like could be tea or coffee or peppers or peppercorns or whatever, some raw materials will have very low tariffs. But as soon as you try to process those and add value, you try to make finished tea bags, you try to crush pepper into a seasoning mix, the tariffs can escalate and you can face higher and higher obstacles to exporting high value products. What RCEP is supposed to do is help you benefit across the whole value chain, raw materials, partially finished materials, fully finished materials. And I think that is very helpful for Cambodian companies, especially in food, but in elsewhere as well. But do recognize, and I'm going to talk about, in this case, chocolate chip cookies or chocolate cookies. They are at they have it the worst, to be honest, because all of the stuff in a chocolate chip cookie is considered sensitive by many governments. Dairy, sugar, chocolate, they face so many challenges. Frankly, it's a miracle you can ever eat a foreign cookie. So let me go through, without going into excruciating detail. Where is my picture here? So there we go. What is on offer? Like, why do we want to go through this aggravation in the first place? So what I've done here is I've highlighted some of the tariffs that are in place for cookies, sweet biscuits or cookies. So if you look at the middle column where it says base tariff, what you can see is that if you were trying to export cookies around Asia, you face very high tariffs, from 8 to 20% on your exported cookie products. That can make it very difficult for you to be competitive compared to local producers or producers that have other trade agreement benefits. 15% is a lot of money. That might be your entire profit on your cookies. So what are we trying to do in RCEP? What you're trying to do is take that base tariff, the rate that everybody else pays, and make it zero or as close to zero as you can. And what you see in this chart is that happens mostly. It can take a while. So some of those tariffs drop over 20 years or more. Some of those tariffs, and you can see how sensitive some of this is, because Japan, for example, Japan was very nervous about other people's cookies. So they have not dropped the tariff to ASEAN, Australia, and New Zealand. So if you think you're going to break into the chocolate chip cookie market in Japan, I'm sorry, probably not, because the tariffs will stay high. And for Korea and Chinese manufacturers of cookies, the Japanese said, forget it, you get nothing. There's no commitment. Now that's unusual to see no commitment in RCEP. It's because we're talking about a highly sensitive product. We don't see this everywhere else. But I just wanted to highlight, we have all these different schedules. So you will have to look at what is it you want to make, where is it you want to send it, and then what is the rule that I need to follow in order to make those cookies. And I'll get to the cookie rule in just a second here. But note again that there's some complexity. But there's also some very big benefits. So for example, Vietnam, Thailand, and the Philippines, which have high tariffs on cookies, are now dropping much more quickly, including for Thailand and the Philippines on day one. So you can now make RCEP cookies and send them to Thailand and the Philippines, well, Philippines once they become an RCEP member, at zero tariffs. So I think this is useful just to remind you that the world is complicated. I apologize for that, especially for smaller businesses, but there are benefits coming, sometimes long, sometimes less long. So let me just show you what a tariff schedule looks like, just so you know when you open up these documents, what are you going to see? On the left-hand side is what's called the HS code. So every product that you have, that you intend to sell, has a code attached to it. And the first job that you have, and again, please reach out to the Ministry of Commerce if you haven't done this already. The first job that you have is to figure out what is the tariff, what is the HS code that applies to my product. So in the case of biscuits, they're 190531.00. So that is the code for biscuits. So you have to find your product. There's a description in the next column, and then it tells you what is the base rate of tariff. In other words, what is the tariff with no trade agreement in place? 15%. And then it goes through year by year, what is the tariff each year? So every year you can see that the cookie tariff for China goes down a bit. Not a lot in this case, but that goes down a bit. So there are benefits coming year by year, and everyone's tariff schedule looks roughly like this, just so you get a sense of what are you looking for. I need to find the HS code on the left. I need to find the product description, make sure that I'm looking at the right thing. What am I currently having to pay in tariffs? And then what are the benefits on offer? And especially for products where the tariff drops quickly, then you say, okay, now it is where that's a good savings for me. Now I will look at what are the rules of origin in order for me to qualify for those tariff savings. The rules of origin, which is of course the point of this seminar today, is to talk about is a tool that we need to have in a trade agreement. Now, why do we need a rule of origin? Because what you don't want is to make a trade integration exercise to bring together Asia and let the Europeans or the Americans sneak their cookies in and take advantage of these lower tariffs. You don't want that. You want it to be reserved for firms that are in RCEP. So you want Cambodian companies in Cambodia to take advantage of RCEP and not European companies sitting in Belgium to be able to slide goods in and get the benefits. They're supposed to go to Cambodian companies. So what are we doing with rules of origin? We have to write rules so that firms that are included in RCEP, Cambodia, can then use those special rules to access other RCEP members. But like any trade agreement, you can't use RCEP to trade with Europe, and Europe can't trade with RCEP or Cambodia using RCEP, just between the members. So you want to make sure that the products are made in RCEP. Now, that's a little bit tricky, and especially for those of you in textiles, you're used to the label on the back that says made in Cambodia. This is different. This is made in Cambodia using the rules of the agreement. It doesn't matter how I put the label in the back of my shirt. I have to follow the rules of origin. And if I do, then it counts as RCEP qualifying. Anything that doesn't meet those rules is not RCEP qualifying, and it has to pay the base rate it has to pay the base rate. Basically, you don't get any benefits if you don't follow the rules. So the rules are super, super important. The good news about RCEP, I think, is that once you've sorted this out, the tariffs are complicated. The rules of origin are less complicated. And once you make a product to fit RCEP rules of origin, you can then send it to all of the countries without having to make any changes to the way that you make the product. So once you qualify for RCEP, you don't have to change it for sending it to China. You don't have to change it for sending it to Korea. You can send to the Australians, to the Thais, without any changes in the product. So I think that is really, really helpful. And that's why we're spending this time today going through how this works. So there are two main ways that we do rules of origin. The first one is pretty simple. People kind of understand this first one. It's 100% Cambodian. The whole thing, usually for agriculture, you grew it, you harvested it, you slaughtered it, you cut the tree down, 100% Cambodian. That is a Cambodian product under RCEP rules, generally qualifies. Okay, that's called wholly obtained, 100% from Cambodia. The second one is a bit more complicated. If I make something a little more than just an onion or a carrot, and it's not 100% Cambodian, so I make a shirt, the thread doesn't come from Cambodia, let's say, or the button doesn't come from Cambodia, so it's not 100% Cambodian. Then what do I need to do? Well, I need to show that the product was substantially transformed in RCEP. So there are different ways to accomplish that. And RCEP, unlike many ASEAN agreements, often uses more than one approach. So many of you who are used to working with ASEAN agreements will know that ASEAN likes to do something called regional value content, RVC, of 40%. In other words, as long as 40% of the value of my shirt comes from RCEP countries, Cambodia plus Thailand, so let's imagine it's a Cambodian sewing and Thai thread and cotton from Vietnam, let's just imagine, then it's an RCEP qualifying shirt under RVC 40 because the content now adds up to 40. We're used to that in ASEAN. Be aware that in RCEP, sometimes we have an RVC 40 rule, and sometimes we have a second rule, and sometimes we have no RVC 40, but only a different rule. So let me get into that in a minute. The bottom line, what I'm trying to say here is, if you're used to ASEAN way of working, make sure you look carefully at the rules for your product in RCEP, because it may be different from what you're used to using. So for cookies, This is the schedule for cookies for this particular chapter. The chapter is 19. It's preparations of cereals, flour, starches, milks, and pastry cooked products. And then in there is all sorts of stuff that one makes: pasta, noodles, weird cereal things. And then 1905 is where we're looking: cookies, breads, cakes, biscuits, cookies. Okay, so you can see now it's by chapter, it's by heading. So these are those HS codes on the left again. Then you find the thing that you care about, cookies. And then on the right is the rule itself. So what is the rule for cookies? We have two separate rules. Two things you could do, one or the other. You don't have to do both. You can have RVC 40, which again, those of you used to working in ASEAN should be familiar with. As long as 40% of my cookie content comes from an RCEP country, it counts as an RCEP qualifying cookie. But there's a second way to do that. In this case, it's change in tariff heading, CTH. I won't go into all of the details about that, but basically it was different parts and components. They could be European parts and components like milk. They could be, or chocolate from Belgium. As long as I make them into something different, now it's a cookie, it can qualify at this level of detail. Okay, so it was something, it became something else, it qualifies. So in our cookie case, we have two ways to qualify for RCEP. Now that can be very helpful. We see across all of the tariff schedules, all of the rule of origin schedules, that the negotiators try very hard to provide multiple ways for you to qualify for tariff benefits in RCEP, because they want to make sure that companies can use this, that RCEP-based firms can use this agreement and get the tariff benefits that are on offer. So they try to be as flexible as they can in creating these rules. So this goes into this in a little bit more detail. I'll discuss it very briefly, but I suggest that you reach out to the Ministry of Commerce if you have questions. So under the change in tariff classification, so RVC, the one on the right, I think you understand that one, which is again, RVC 40% of the content comes from RCEP, qualifies. And for RCEP, it's at 40% for basically everything where this rule is used. So you don't need to worry about higher levels of content, 40%. The change in tariff classification is the level of detail that you need and the amount of transformation you have to have from raw materials to finished goods. So there are three different ways to note this. I think I'm not going to go into detail because it's a bit too confusing at the moment, but if you see CC, change in chapter, that's what this means at the 2-digit level. It was a fruit, I smashed it, it became a juice. Change in tariff chapter, so CC, was a fruit under, I forget what fruit is like 9 or something, and then it becomes a juice under chapter 20, done. Doesn't matter where the fruit comes from, as long as in Cambodia I smash it and I change the chapter, it qualifies. In the case of our cookies is change of tariff heading at the 4-digit level, so it has to have been made of something that is not called 1905, and then it becomes 1905. Again, please reach out to your customs officials and the Cambodian Commerce Ministry if you have particular questions, or feel free to ask us. The point here is that there's lots of ways to do this, and you need to look very carefully at the rules. Now, it's not all depressing before you all panic about using RCEP. Let me just show you another one. Oh, this is depressing. I'll come back to this in a second. Wait, where did my, here we go, textiles. Let me show one that is less depressing, which is textiles. The excellent news about the textile rules in RCEP is that they're relatively simple to use. It was something, it becomes something else. And in the case of textiles, change of chapter, it was fabric. And for the most part, once you transform fabric into a finished piece of apparel, it qualifies under RCEP. And you can see that all of these chapters, 57, this one happens to show 57 through 62, all of these chapters have the same rule. As long as you transform it at the chapter heading. So if we look at chapter 57 on carpets, if it was not carpets, it was raw wool or silk, and you've now made a carpet, it has been transformed under RCEP rules, it qualifies for tariff benefits in selling carpets around the region, or shorts, or swimsuits, or knitted fabrics, or all of these different categories. For a textile producer, this is extremely helpful because Cambodia on its own doesn't make the full gamut of textiles, from yarns to fabrics to dyeing and weaving to finished apparel items. So if you have other kinds of rules, which we see in different agreements, it can be very hard to use those agreements because they require too much to be done domestically. But under RCEP, as long as you have transformed it from something into this new product, you get the benefits. And for RCEP countries for textiles, many of them have very high tariff rates in place that then go to zero. So you can then sell swimsuits into Australia and save 9.5%, for example. So lots of benefits ahead, I think, for textile producers in particular. And the point again, please make sure that you know which rule applies to your products and that you qualify for those benefits that are on offer. So after you said, I want to make swimsuits, I want to sell them in RCEP, I find where swimsuits are, they're chapter 62. I look at the level of the rule. I say, can I meet that rule? And if the answer is yes, great. Now, what are the tariff preferences or the tariff benefits that I'm going to get for that? Once I make something that meets RCEP rules, I can send it without having to change out the buttons, the yarn, the embellishments, the whatever. The product is an RCEP product. And it can be sent then to China, to Australia, to Cambodia, to Vietnam, wherever, without having to change the way you make a product. That I think is very helpful. The last thing that I just want to mention here is how do we manage this process? You don't, again, you don't just get to show up at customs and just say, see my smiling face, I'm from Cambodia, it qualifies as an RCEP Cambodian good. No, you have to follow the rules, and then you need the piece of paper, the preferential certificate of origin that says that you qualify. So you will need to fill out that form so that you have the documents that show that you qualify. And once you do that, it should make it easier for you to move goods around the region. So make sure that you are using the right form, that you trained your staff so that they're using the right form, and that you're not making mistakes on the form. Because mistakes can be very problematic in some markets. So make sure you're following the rules, that you document them, that you keep all the internal documentation attached to this if you need it, that you can prove where things came from, you can prove how much value was added by what, and those documents you have to hang on to. So make sure you don't lose your documents. The other things that I just want to mention very briefly before I finish is there are some other rules in customs and trade facilitation that I think can be very helpful. So for many of you who export, there are new rules that are coming in RCEP around advanced rulings, which tells you like, what's the HS code? Do you qualify for rules of origin, et cetera? And once they decide that, then it's stable for 3 years. So you don't have to keep going and asking, what is this? How do we classify my shirt? Does it meet the rules of origin every time? You get it once and then it's good for 3 years. There's also some faster facilitating at the borders so that goods don't rot while they're waiting for clearance. Much of this is meant to be electronic. And I think this is a very important point for Cambodian operators. If you are exporting a lot, especially, make sure that you get yourself qualified or that your logistics provider is qualified, your customs broker, as an authorized operator for RCEP. Because if you are an RCEP authorized operator, then the process can be much simpler at the borders as well. And so this new scheme for RCEP, I think, is going to be very helpful in moving goods across the border. Because the net result, what are they trying to accomplish in RCEP? They're trying to make it easier and faster for you to move goods around the region and for Cambodian companies to be finding new markets, to be part of new supply chains in Asia for Asia. And I think that is why they're trying to do everything they can at the government level to make it so that you can participate. The last thing I'm just going to mention is that we've been running a number of booklets, writing a number of booklets for companies on how to use some of these elements. So here's 3. You'll get the slides, I'm sure, after this. But there's specific information because I can tell you broad picture about RCEP, but what you really want to know is the very specifics. How does this apply to my company, my industry, my sector? So we're working on industry-specific booklets, and happy to work with any of you on creating those industry-specific booklets. that apply to goods or specific kinds of goods, advanced manufacturing, could be textiles, services, the intellectual property rights commitments, etc. So please do reach out for information. It's a complicated agreement, but the benefits, I think, are worth it for most companies because you can now access Asia in a way that you couldn't before. And I think that is a huge value. And again, I'm delighted to be here today presenting with those on this call about how it is that Cambodian companies can take advantage of these benefits. So let me stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deborah. Just before I go to Mr. Uchanta, there were a number of requests, Deborah, for us to share the slides that you presented today, given the complexity of some of the slide. Is it okay with you?
Yes, you should have the slides, and that's not a problem at all because this is a very complicated topic. And so slides, and again, the slides have the booklet information, so you can also go there and see what else is being rolled out to support you. Happy to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. You've mentioned a number of features and a number of documents that traders should have access to. The preferential CO, for instance, those are some of the support that is provided by government authorities, especially the GDC, the Customs Department, and the Ministry of Commerce. And we're very happy to have Mr. Unchanta, who is the director of the Export-Import Department of the Ministry of Commerce, who is going to explain to us how MOC responds to the needs and responds to the demands from the agreements, from the rules of origin. I have a few questions for you, Director Chanta. First of all, how rules of origin apply to Cambodian-made products? We've heard Deborah already mention a few examples. What improvements does the RCEP rule of origin bring over other rules of origin? How has the MOC prepared for that? What about this preferential CO that Deborah mentioned? And in your experience, does the Cambodia private sector understand how to use the rule of origin besides getting interested into the website, into the product and the studies that MOC produces? Do they come to you? Do they ask questions? And what is being done for them to avail of the opportunities? Mr. Chanta, before I give you the floor, just allow me to introduce your expertise and your experience. Dr. Chanta holds a bachelor degree in business administration. He holds a master's degree in the Korean economy from Kyung University of Korea. He has served as a civil servant since 1998. In 2020, he was promoted to be a director of the Export-Import Department of the Ministry of Commerce. His main responsibility is to lead the issuance of certificate of origin and to research on the trade policy and strategy planning for cross-border trade facilitation. And beside this, he obviously joined RCEP negotiations, sub-working groups on the rules of origin. So I think we have the right person to learn from. Director Chanta, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, my respect to excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Regarding your question, the first question, to have better understanding, I wish to start with a general definition of rural origin. Rural origin is simply a rule to determine the nationality of the good. Preferential rule of origin are used to determine whether the good qualify for preferential tariff offers under the agreement. They are a set of criteria that the good need to comply with in order to be considered originating in the territory of the trade agreement. The good are checks against these criteria to establish whether they can be considered originating in countries when export to an FTA partner. Back to the question, how rule of origin applies to Cambodian-made product now before RCEP. I wish to inform that currently Cambodian-made products are able to satisfy origin criteria and eligible for preferential tariff treatment under our existing free trade agreement, namely ATIGA and ASEAN +1 FTA, to name a few, and under the unilateral trade preference, such as EBA scheme of EU, UK, GSP, and other for least developed countries. Before RCEP, when exporters want to export to Korea, this is an example. China, New Zealand, Australia, Japan. This is, I think, this is FTA plus ASEAN FTA +1. They have to export based on product specific rule under ASEAN Korea FTA, ASEAN China, ASEAN Australia, New Zealand, ASEAN Japan, respectively. But now, RCEP exists. Exporter can take RCEP product specific rule as a grounded from a rule when export to those markets. This act is believed to provide local enterprise and business more flexibility and choice in exporting their products and create open trade environment and supply better of their productivity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Chanta. So we understand that your department is the one handling the certificate of origin, including the preferential certificate of origin. So we see that we have mechanism in place at the Ministry of Commerce to already issue the preferential certificate of origin, because RCEP entered into force already. Is that the case? You can already issue preferential certificate of origin in the Ministry of Commerce, Mr. Chanta? You're muted, Mr. Chanta.
I'm sorry. Actually, I answers the question that you asked previous. So maybe I go one by one question that you asked. Thank you. Thank for the question. Question number 2, that what is change or improvement is also bringing in terms of rural origin. I wish to highlight some of the improvement of the rural origin under RCEP. RCEP to simplify its rule of origin and streamline operational certification procedure and have a greater regional accumulation. Let me take an example of RCEP products specific rule or PSR improvement on apparel and textile products and vehicle comparing to ASEAN Korea FTA product specific rule. In ASEAN Korea FTA product specific rule, origin criteria for apparel is changed in Tariff chapter, plus cutting and sewing. But in RCEP, PSR is only changed in Tariff chapter without extra specific manufacturing process. Another example, origin criteria for vehicle under AK FTA is RVC called regional volume content 45%, whereas in the RCEP only 40%. Regarding the accumulation, as you are already aware of, RCEP consists of 15 parties, so that with regional accumulation, business can take advantage of a regional supply chain, and for Cambodian made products can accumulate raw material with a greater parity than the existing FTA that has already been implemented. Lastly, RCEP rule of origin also promotes trade facilitation. In RCEP agreement, Article 3.16, proof of origin allow 3 options for documentation required of traders seeking a preferential tariff treatment, including 1, certificate of origin issued by an issuing body of each party, 2, declaration of origin by an improved exporter, and last one, declaration of origin by an exporter to or producer that subject to the implementation period. Once entry to force, all members will implement declaration origin by an improved exporter under Article 3.21 of RCEP agreement. The improved exporter shall be authorized by respective parties, and they shall have a demonstrated satisfactory level of experience in export in accordance with the law and regulation of the exporting parties, and shall have knowledge and understanding of rule of origin and have good compliance record or others requirements. Whilst the declaration of origin by all exporter or producers in subject to the implementation period, it is also worth mentioning that 11 members of the RCEP, including Australia, Brunei, Jerusalem, China, Indonesia, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, New Zealand, the Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam will implement a declaration of origin by an exporter or producer in 10 years after entry to force. And for Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, will have up to 20 years to implement the same. In conclusion, to the question I have about, RCEP will contribute a positive impact through its simplified rule of origin and operational certification procedure. And for the question number 3, you just asked this moment. So yeah, so far we announcement of entry into force of the RCEP agreement and highlight all chapter, including chapter on rule of origin. We as well published an announcement of our readiness on the automation system that allow all exporters to apply for CO form RCEP via our websites, and we also assign a focal point for supporting any inquiry raised by exporters. Through the websites, you can also find the exporters guideline in which you introduce step by step on how to apply for CO form of all time, including form RCEP. Another preparation within the Ministry of Commerce Department of Export-Import Department has conducts various in-house training amongst our officers who are in charge of issuing certificate of origin to make sure we have a common understanding regarding rule of origin and operational certificate of origin certification procedure under RCEP agreement. For question number 4, on my personal note, I would like to say most of private sectors understand the rule of origin quite well. Taking example of GMAX and Cambodian Footwear Association, to name a few. However, since also ROO introduced, we plan to conduct workshop specifically focus on rule of origin and operational certification procedure. On top of that, we will insert also ROO chapter in our curriculum for training shipping agent, and I hope this will assist private sector to better avail of the opportunity created by rule of origin under RCEP. However, I believe that we alone cannot comprehensive spread the tremendous benefit of RCEP. Thus, the cooperation with the organization, local and international firm is fairly crucial. With this, the ministry is hoping to initiate more elaborative seminar or events on sport training to further take this agreement forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chanta. That's very reassuring. So we understand that not only the documentary process is ready, but MOC has also been proactive in preparing documentations, preparing training materials, so that the exporters, the traders in Cambodia can take advantage of these rules. You've mentioned two associations, the Footwear Association and GMAC. GMAC is the Garment Manufacturing Association of Cambodia, which are representing the main export of Cambodia. But do you see other exporters? I think Deborah mentioned, for instance, food producers in other sectors of Cambodia also understanding these rules, also being able to use these rules, because we want to promote export, but we also want to promote other sectors. So what about the other sectors that are not prominent or not well organized or represented? How can you, what recommendation do you have for these sectors to get more updated, up to date on rules of origin, Mr. Chanta?
Well, as I mentioned in my answer to the last point, that we prepare to conduct a more workshop and work closely with the association that related to export products. So we didn't schedule it, but we hope we will organize more and more to give our exporters well understand. Otherwise, our exporter can come to our department to ask a question, so we can clarify what they have raised their question. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chanta. And while you were responding, we've got a first question from our audience, from Mr. Mark Milley. I'd like to encourage all our participants today to ask questions through the Q&A box. You can do that anonymously, or you can have your name listed there, and we will try to relay your questions to our experts. I have a question here, Deborah. I'm not sure you can see the questions. I know that this is really into two of your passions, the RCEP and the digital space. So there's a question from Mr. Mark Milley who said, do panelists expect RCEP rules of origin and growing use of digital trade tools to help companies improve resilience in their regional supply chains? This could be the focus of another dialogue, of another workshop, but I'll give you a few minutes to respond, Deborah. Thank you.
I think it's a great question, and as I read it, I thought, Mark, this is actually a great suggestion. What would be useful, as an example, is to have Cambodian firms who say we can meet the RCEP rules of origin, make that a sort of marketing pitch for why they should be part of a supply chain. So we've already examined the rules of origin. We already produced to meet RCEP rules of origin. That is a potential lever that you could use in becoming an attractive partner in a supply chain for all sorts of things, for raw materials or parts or components or finished products. If you could say, we've already done this work and we're prepared to be joined with any of the RCEP firms in creating products that can be then sent easily around RCEP, I think that is an advantage that firms would have that you might not find elsewhere. And especially as we come through COVID, where firms are relooking much more intensively at who's in their supply chain and what are the benefits that they get from that. They're looking for new partners. That I think could give a real advantage to many Cambodian companies that otherwise might not be on the radar. And it doesn't just have to be, I think as Sven was suggesting, it doesn't just have to be in the sectors where Cambodia is sort of famously competitive, textiles, footwear, et cetera, but also in areas I would suggest of all kinds of things, food in particular, all kinds of craft products and so forth. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things that Cambodian companies already do and can do more carefully or more competitively, especially if they got some investment. Remember that RCEP is not just about trade and goods, it's also about investment, inbound investment. And so you have the potential to partner up with firms in ways that you didn't before. And I think that is an advantage for firms who are organized, savvy, understand the rules, and then can say, that's a big marketing advantage that we have. We know what we're doing, as opposed to some other firm that is completely oblivious to what's happening.
Thank you, Deborah, and give me a very good transition to mention that our next dialogue would be on custom clearance and trade facilitation. The number 4 would be on services, and the number 5 would be on investments. But as you've heard from Deborah's response, all these different chapters under the RCEP are interlinked. So you cannot just read one chapters and think that you would be able to export your product just looking and following this chapter, but you have to look at other aspects of trading goods, trading services, trade facilitation services, e-commerce, etc. So thank you, Deborah, for taking the question. And with this, I think we are a little bit behind schedule, but it's a very interesting and very complex topic. So I hope Jeremy will not mind, as Jeremy Gross would take over the moderation from me at this stage. I'd like to thank Deborah and Mr. Unchanta, Director at the Ministry of Commerce, to have joined us this morning. And I hope you will be staying with us as I expect more questions from our audience. Thank you, and over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Sven, and thank you very much again to Deborah and Unchantra. So I think now the scene has been set. We've heard about the provisions under about our rules of origin from Deborah, and Unchantra has spoken about the proactive approach of MOC to prepare for RCEP, and including giving some examples. So in one sense, this is like the supply side. Now we really want to look at the demand side and see how businesses can make use of the provisions and navigate the regulatory system to their benefit. So for this, I am joined by 2 experts. Let me introduce them. The first is Mr. Clint O'Connell. He is partner and head of tax and customs at DFDL. Clint may be a familiar face, as he's been in Cambodia for over a decade. Clint is a tax man, not one taking your money, rather acting as a tax advisor both to multinational and regional businesses looking to invest in Cambodia, as well as providing tax assistance to many local businesses. He also contributes to, amongst others, the International Tax Review and Bloomberg BNA's Tax Planning International Asia Pacific Focus Journal. So thank you for joining us, Clint. Our second panelist will be Robin Flint. Since December, Robin has been First Secretary at the Australian Embassy in Cambodia. However, prior to this posting, Robin helped negotiate several Australian free trade agreements where he focused on issues including rules of origin, product-specific rules, customs procedures, and agricultural goods market access. So thank you, Robin, for joining us as well. Now, we really want to make this session as interactive as possible, giving you an opportunity to ask questions and think aloud with the support of our two experts. So please, if you have any questions, type them into the Q&A box and I will pose the questions to the experts. But to get started, I'm going to use my prerogative as moderator to get the conversation going by asking our experts some questions each. So if I start with you, Clint. So we've now been hearing from Deborah and Chandra about the provisions of the agreement and the government response. But coming from the private sector and dealing with businesses, both in Cambodia and outside, do you think investors are aware of and interested in the rules of origin?
Thank you, Jeremy. And before I get started, good morning to Your Excellencies, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. So with respect to the interest, firms like ours, DFDL, and Dr. Sapana, we tend to act a little bit like a canary in the well when it comes to dealing with FDI into Cambodia. Typically, whether they like it or not, investors need to come and see legal advisors and tax advisors. So we tend to be at the front line when it comes to looking or dealing with foreign investors. So what we've seen in recent times is a great deal of interest in RCEP. That is combined with other developments in Cambodia, such as the new law on investment and the free trade agreements that Cambodia has signed with China and Korea. So typically when firms like ours and Dr. Sapana's firm, when we advise new client or new investors into Cambodia, we talk about the legal issues, the tax issues, and also the customs issues. So one of the key things that we look at, as was touched on earlier by Deborah and His Excellency, was the benefit of treaties such as RCEP, and of course the key to unlocking the benefits of those treaties is the rules of origin and the ability to obtain certificates of origin. So it is indeed one of the key features that we have been dealing with and advising new advisors to the market in Cambodia. Thank you.
Thank you, Clint, for that. So are Cambodian, in your perspective, are Cambodian exporters taking advantage of the FTA provisions? And what more could be done to ensure that Cambodian businesses do not lose out?
I think as the representative from the Ministry of Commerce quite rightly pointed out, there are some industries in Cambodia that are very well aware of the benefits of the certificate of origin and free trade agreements, in particular GMAC. Obviously, that's one of the foremost industries in Cambodia with respect to the export of garments. There are some industries where I think we need to improve with respect to teaching or spreading the word, if you like, on the benefits of free trade agreements such as RCEP. I have to give a lot of kudos to His Excellency Soksapana, who's been doing an amazing job with spreading the word with articles in local newspapers. I think I've seen him on a number of webinars, even with my home country, New Zealand, as far as that. So he's doing a fantastic job in spreading the word. But we do need to have, I think, more dialogue. Happy to hear, I think, as you were with the Ministry of Commerce, with their ambition to spread the word as well. But yeah, I think generally there is a good level of understanding, given that since Cambodia's accession to the WTO in the early 2000s, which essentially brought in the rules of origin to Cambodia, it has been around for some time. But I think particularly for SMEs in Cambodia and industries which perhaps were not previously encouraged to export, like in particular agriculture, which I think is going to be a key industry going forward. Perhaps we need to spread the word a bit more.
Thank you. And that all sounds very positive, and it's good to know. We've heard your positive feedback about the efforts of Soksapana, but we've heard from Ministry of Commerce that they're being proactive, and this is something that Deborah also recognized about the proactive approach in Cambodia. So I think that bodes very well for the future. Robin, perhaps if I can come on to you, and before asking you about Australian businesses and rules of origin, as a negotiator, can I ask you for your perspective about the rationale for the RCEP ROO during the RCEP negotiations and the resulting benefits the agreed outcomes provide for business?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. And good morning, everyone on the line as well. So, I mean, that's a very good question. It's obviously with an agreement like RCEP, which has 15 members, and during the negotiations, there were 16 members with India part of the negotiations as well. You can imagine that it's a very complex negotiation for all parties to be able to get what they want, particularly for rules of origin, while also protecting, their own sensitivities and protecting their own domestic policies as well. So it was definitely a very, I think, difficult and challenging negotiation over the almost decade that RCEP was being negotiated. But I think there were some certain core principles that negotiators and parties were very conscious of. And first and foremost, I think it was the idea that ASEAN is at the center of RCEP was quite critical, and being able to build upon the ASEAN Plus FTAs was really an important core principle for negotiators. Secondly, I think there was a real attempt to really comply with WTO rules as much as we can, and try to embed those rules within the FTA themselves, particularly in relation to the revised Kyoto Convention Annex K, which is the WTO guidance on rules of origin, and also the WTO's trade facilitation agreement, which sort of crosses into the rules of origin space as well. I think thirdly, there was a real attempt to establish very trade facilitative rules, which are easy for business to understand, while also protecting the RCEP regional supply chain. And I think lastly, there was a real attempt to provide certainty to traders and to develop the regional supply chain. Can I ask everyone to go on mute? Sorry, there was some feedback coming through. Jeremy, in terms of the benefits, I think, there was a question on the chat previously about, you know, who's going to see the most benefit, you know, the biggest jump in through the rules of origin and through the trade in RCEP. And I think it's a very difficult question to answer, because I think every party, every member will gradually, as they get used to RCEP, understand its benefits and tap into its preferences over time. I think there will be some parties that will benefit more quickly, such as the North Asian members, China, Japan, Korea, as it's quite a new agreement for them. But we have to remember that RCEP operates in parallel to all other FTAs that are in existence in the region. So RCEP doesn't supersede or take over from, you know, the CPTPP, which some members are a part of, or other bilateral agreements that members might have with each other. So RCEP really provides an option for traders and business people to tap into if they feel that there is a benefit that benefits them. I think, just to close off on this question, the biggest benefit for me is really the regional integration component of the RCEP, you know, supply and production chain that it produces. So I think through the accumulation model that RCEP has, there's a real benefit for countries like Cambodia to really analyze how they fit into an RCEP regional production and supply chain. Where do they sit within that downstream production system? And can they set themselves up as a production base for input materials into the auto industry? Or can they set themselves up as a distribution hub for electronic goods for the RCEP region? So these are really questions that over time, I think will be answered by a lot of businesses, and particularly in Cambodia. And I'm really looking forward to seeing how you know, businesses in Cambodia can really take advantage of the RCEP benefits.
Thank you, Robin. I think it is good to remember that RCEP is operating in a very dynamic environment, and RCEP is one way forward, one option for companies. I do have another question for you, but just to remind those watching, please don't be shy, write your questions in the chat box. This should really be a dialogue between you and the experts rather than me and the experts. So please feel free to add your comments or questions for the experts. Let's look a little bit about the Australia and what happens there. And can you give me a sense of how Australian businesses use the ROO in ASEAN RCEP?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question as well. I think, Jeremy, it's certainly for RCEP, because it's such a new agreement, it's hard to sort of analyze the uptake of Australian businesses for RCEP in particular. But I can talk more generally about, you know, FTAs in the region and how Australian businesses do use rules of origin. The expectation for Australian businesses is that over time, we will start to see more and more Australian traders tap into RCEP. We have to remember that for Australian exporters, a lot of our export is done under our bilateral FTAs with our regional partners, as well as under our ASEAN +2 FTA, the ANZUTA agreement with Australia and New Zealand. So we do have a huge volume of trade that already goes under those agreements. And we expect that RCEP will, you know, over time, businesses will start to tap into RCEP where there's a benefit that ANZUTA and our bilateral FTAs don't necessarily provide. And that's talking specifically about goods trade, not about investment or services or the digital space, for example. But Australian businesses tend to be quite savvy around FTA rules of origin use. We find that because of the way that Australia produces its goods, we typically find that most businesses who utilize tariff preference under FTAs will export under wholly obtained or produced entirely origin criteria in FTAs. And this is because most of Australia's exported product is either agricultural goods, wine, or mineral products, which are more easily sort of grown and harvested in Australia or produced entirely from Australian originating materials. And that's quite in contrast, I think, to the situation in Cambodia, where we would likely see more exports from Cambodia to the region really be more around manufactured goods, electronic components, textiles, bicycles, footwear, things like that, which are more manufactured goods, which require imported material to produce. And we'll see from, I think from Cambodia, a more of a requirement to comply with product-specific rules, change in tariff classification, or regional value content rules when they trade under RCEP. I think Australian businesses tend to rely a lot on brokers, as well as freight forwarders and other specialist organizations to help with them trading within the region under an FTA. So we see that Australian businesses really do partner and procure the services of customs brokers to do the documentation requirements on their behalf, or to advise them on rules of origin specific issues when they are exporting. But where we do find the biggest challenges, like everywhere else, it's really in the SME sector, and trying to support SMEs to understand FTAs, to understand how to export, and understand how to treat their product, particularly under RCEP. So that's where a lot of Australia's support goes, is into the SME community.
That sort of leads into the next question I wanted to ask. And I think this sort of comparative experience is important. We were talking earlier and wondering, you know, how to support Cambodian businesses understand the rules of origin. So how are Australian businesses helped to understand the rules of origin? You mentioned that brokers actually play a big role. So is it through brokers actually reaching out to the businesses, or what is the level of support from government? How do they explain and reach out to, especially the SMEs, to talk about the potentials and benefits?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I think there's two sort of streams of support. One is from the private sector, and the other is from the public sector through the government. The private sector, you know, businesses do reach out to the chambers of commerce, to expert international export advisory organizations, customs brokers, to freight forwarders, or to their industry groups that represent their product. So I think within the private sector, there is already in Australia a lot of support for traders to tap into, and that's something I think that would be very beneficial, you know, for Cambodian businesses to, if available, to tap into, you know, the equivalent resources that they have here in Cambodia. In the public sector, the government does quite a lot of support, and His Excellency Sim Sok-heng did mention quite a bit of support that that Cambodia government and MOC provides to Cambodian businesses. We do, the Australian government does something very similar as well. We provide an online portal called the Free Trade Agreements FTA portal, which is a one-stop shop for the public to enter a description of their good or the HS code of their good into the portal, and then they can compare which free trade agreement gives them the most benefit in terms of tariff preference when exporting to a particular market. It also provides information on all the rules of origin for every FTA that Australia has, based on each product that someone is interested in, as well as all the documentation requirements that are required to export your product. So this is a very valuable tool that we see a lot of Australian businesses tap into when they're looking at exporting overseas. Australia also produces a business guide, similar to what Cambodia does as well, a business guide for traders, which one is focused on the export side, and we have one that is focused on the import side into Australia, so very customs specific rules. And then we also have, in previous times before COVID, we had what we call a sort of FTA roadshow, where the government trade negotiators and experts would travel around the country to different cities and hold workshops with interested industry groups and traders to talk about the FTAs and how they can tap into those as well. So there are several areas that the Australian government provides support to traders, and we see that this is very something that, particularly for SMEs and the small medium enterprise sector, is something that's very valuable for them, because otherwise they would find it very difficult to understand export markets and understand how to actually comply with the rules of origin within an FTA.
Thank you. I think that's very interesting, hearing more about how this works in Australia and the outreach and the support available. I don't know if you'd be brave enough, but do you have any recommendations that you would like to give to Cambodian business? I think it's sort of been mentioned previously, but I think for Cambodian business, if you want to understand RCEP, read the agreement. So Chapter 3 is Rules of Origin in the RCEP agreement. Chapter 4 is the Customs and Trade Facilitation chapter. They go hand in hand, and I think really the first step is reading the agreement, understanding what it means. It's quite complex, but it's very important to understand what are the rules and what benefits that they provide. I think secondly, tap into your business resources in the private sector. So, industry groups that might represent a particular Cambodian business sector, tap into those networks because those are very valuable with understanding what other people are doing, how they are attracting investment or exporting under RCEP or exporting into neighboring countries, and getting their experiences about how they are doing things. And then lastly, I think really tapping into the Cambodian government resources as best you can, working with Ministry of Commerce or the Ministry of Finance or the Agricultural Ministry to share, your challenges and to ask for support, because I think it was mentioned earlier, the need to have, workshops that are run by, government to help traders to better understand rules of origin or better understand how they can, the documentation requirements under the agreement. So these are all, I think, very valuable tools that Cambodian businesses can tap into. And lastly, I think just to finish this off, the benefits of RCEP won't happen immediately for Cambodian businesses. It's not just because people aren't trading under RCEP right now isn't a bad thing. It takes time to understand the FTA, and really over the next year, particularly with post-COVID economic recovery and businesses starting to look more and more to the region to export their products, I think over the next 2 years or so,
it will be very important for Cambodian businesses to really look into RCEP to see how that can support them and support the nation to grow economically post-COVID.
Thank you for that very good advice. We do have a couple of questions that have come in. I think they're really more, they could be directed towards any of the panelists. I'm sure you'd all have opinions about them. The first one is, what are some of the key long-term implications of RCEP and rules of origin? Do you expect there to be less reliance on exporters outside of RCEP in the future? Because ideally a sustainable supply chain would be built here. So that's one question I've received. I don't know if Clint or Robin, if you have any thoughts about that you'd like to offer.
Yeah, sure, Jeremy. I think, of course, there is a compelling case with RCEP, and I think as Robin touched on with respect to from a Cambodian context, the ability to tap into global supply chains, and with respect in particular to agriculture, which is industries which are being promoted under the law of investment. The idea of having your supply chain self-contained in RCEP is indeed a compelling proposition. But I think we still need to be mindful that there are significant markets currently that Cambodia export to, of which those countries do not belong to RCEP. The States in particular is a major export market for Cambodia. So I think whilst there is a compelling argument, we should learn the lessons from the ABA with respect to Europe, and try not to put all our eggs in one basket, and to diversify our export markets as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Clint. Did you want to add anything to that, Robin?
I think that's a good question. I think just like Clint said, diversification of market access is very important, and managing risk in the business environment. So really, a reliance wholly on RCEP is probably not the greatest business model for long-term longevity within a global supply chain. So being able to import goods from outside of RCEP and incorporate that into the RCEP regional supply chain is something that I think will continue to be very valuable. So even though that RCEP might encourage a RCEP only sort of supply and production chain, we have to remember that RCEP has very liberal rules of origin that allow input materials from outside of RCEP, from the US, from Europe, from Central and South America, for example, to come in and still be eligible for when produced within the RCEP region into other goods, still be eligible potentially under the RCEP banner. So I think it'll be interesting to see over the next 5 to 10 years as more of the regulatory arrangements come into place for RCEP over time, how this RCEP regional supply chain actually looks, and how countries like Cambodia actually start to play in that field.
Thank you. And I see actually Deborah has responded to that question as well in the questions and answer box, which I'm sure you can all access, but let me just read her response. If I had an option to use an RCEP qualified firm or any non-RCEP firm to do trade in Asia, I would likely pick RCEP firms. The benefit accelerates over time, so getting firms in will continue to win out over firms that are not part of RCEP. So thank you, Deborah, for your response there. Another question I'm going to ask, we are actually in time deficit, so we may have to make this the last question, but we have a question on any view on the cost of compliance to meet rules of origin versus tariff reduction benefits under RCEP. Clint, do you have any response to this question?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it's pretty well documented that the certificate of origin fees in Cambodia are probably a bit higher than in other jurisdictions. But when you're comparing, say, I think the fees range from USD $18 to $54 to obtain a certificate of origin. When you compare those costs with the ability to utilize a tariff reduction or tariff elimination, I would suggest that the benefits of utilizing or tapping into RCEP would, in most cases, greatly outweigh the costs involved to be compliant.
Thank you. Robin?
Thanks, Jeremy. I think when it comes to compliance costs, there's also the cost of time as well, which businesses sort of factor into whether applying for a tariff preference under an FTA is really worth it. And under RCEP, you know, there are requirements to keep records, to understand how your product is made, understand the costs of everything, so that when it comes time to export your goods and the importer is making a tariff claim, that they have all the necessary documentation, not just the certificate of origin, but also other evidence that can help them apply for that tariff. So there are other sort of resource constraints on businesses to comply with an FTA rule of origin. But like Clint said, these do not outweigh the benefits that a tariff preference can have, particularly for high value goods and consignments, which in a lot of cases, you know, save, you know, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in trade, you know, per consignment or per year. So the benefit definitely outweighs any challenges that businesses might have with complying with ROO.
Thank you. We do actually have more questions and also responses in the chat box. Unfortunately, we really are out of time. But let's see if we can actually compile the questions and responses, and then we can send the responses out when we send you the link to the recording of today's event. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to bring this session to a close, but special thanks to Clint and Robin for joining us, and also to the audience for your questions. Thank you very much, and I will hand back to Sven for the third session, to introduce the third session.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, for very efficient moderation. Before I move to the third session, I have received a few questions on private messages, and the question is actually to Robin. Some of our participants are wondering what is the 70 meaning on your jackets. We can see when you are spotlighted that you have a nice 70. Can you just tell us what's the meaning of that?
Okay, that's in celebration of Australia's long and historic relationship with ASEAN. So we have 70 year long relationship, which is this year. So we have these commemorative pins that have been created for us on this side. So yes, that's our relationship with Australia's relationship with ASEAN.
Thank you, Robin. Yes, so we're going to move to the last session, which is actually used to try to clarify everything we have learned today, try to remember everything we have learned today because of the complexity of RCEP in general, but of rules of origin in particular. And Robin was recommending that private sector should actually read the agreements, which is quite complex and bulky. And I think we are fortunate to have one of the few Cambodian senior advisor and private sector persona to have read the RCEP agreement in Dr. Soxipana. So we're very lucky that at least we have one we can rely on for all these dialogues on RCEP. So thank you, Excellency Dr. Soxipana, for joining us today. Before I give you the floor and ask a few questions, I'd like to remind all of you attending here today that Dr. Sipana, since 2009, is a practicing attorney and the founding partner at Soxipana and Associate, a law firm in Phnom Penh that Clint mentioned earlier on. Dr. Sipana was appointed by the Prime Minister Samdech Techo Hun Sen to hold concurrently the position of advisor of the Royal Government of Cambodia, as advisor to the Supreme National Economic Council, SNEC in short, and as advisor to the Council for the Development of Cambodia, CDC in short, with rank of minister in August 2009 and November 2011 respectively. He was then reappointed as senior advisor to the Royal Government of Cambodia in September 2018 with the rank of senior minister. And in that capacity, he also led Cambodia hosting the 13th ASEM Summit last year. And he was also entrusted with the responsibility of ASEM SOM. Believe it or not, before this, Excellency Soxipana also had a long career. He served as Secretary of State at the Ministry of Commerce, where I had the privilege to work with His Excellency. And he also had a short stint with international organization from 2005 to 2009 as a director of the International Trade Center in Geneva. But maybe selfishly, I could say we're very lucky to have you back in Cambodia in 2009 because we really need you here, Excellency. So thank you again for being patient and for joining us today, as you did for the first dialogue on e-commerce. So I have a few questions to Your Excellency today. First of all, what have we learned today on RCEP and on rules of origin? What else could be done to get more Cambodian businesses to be interested and hopefully in using the rules of origin? What does this tell us for the future of FTA negotiation? We know Cambodia signed agreements with China, with Korea. Can we learn from the negotiation of the rules of origin provision in RCEP for future FTAs? And I know it's also very dear to your heart. I haven't mentioned him here in your bio, but what's the role of the academia, the research institution in raising awareness on FTA and on RCEP? Can we clone you, Dr. Sipana, and have 20 Sipanas for each chapters of RCEP or for each FTA? Or do you have a short-term fix so that we can benefit from the RCEP provisions? Over to you, Excellency, Dr. Soxipana.
Swen, I think you give me too much credit. But again, you know, you're talking about 30 years of work in Cambodia. I would say, yeah, one more year be 30 years. So it's quite a long period to watch the development of the country. But I want to say, I mean, going back to our days together in the Ministry of Commerce, in the WTO accession, now it's very different than those days. Back then, we don't have a private sector. I mean, when Cambodia joined WTO, we barely have any private sector except garment industry, except you know, and most of these garment industry owner are not Cambodian anyway, right? So this is my first comment on the actual situation. Fast forward back to today, we do have a very strong private sector, and the bulk of them, I would say, are Cambodian now. And this is quite reassuring in the sense that finally a lot of Cambodian opportunity, a lot of Cambodian business are driven by Cambodian. And this is something quite interesting from the dynamics of the post-WTO. Of course, the WTO is a stepping stone for the development of the private sector up to today. But what we had, the last dimension, I think, will be a game changer for Cambodia in the context of RCEP, is that most of the private sector now, the Cambodian private sector now, are run by their children, are not run by the old Oknya, okay? When we joined the WTO, when we negotiate WTO, I had to deal with the first generation Oknya. Not as sophisticated, not as educated. Well, they're good business, okay? But domestic business. But in terms of international trade, they're not there yet. But the dynamics now is that most of their business are taken over by their children, whom they have sent to study abroad, to Australia, to New Zealand, to Singapore, to US, to France. And they're back now after 10 years, 7 years abroad. They're back taking over the family business and taking the family business to a higher level. And that's why I'm not surprised when, Sokeng mentioned that as soon as we launched that platform, information platform, over 100,000 viewer have checked on that. So this is a sign that, people are ready. Because if they're not well educated, they wouldn't check that. If they don't speak English, they wouldn't check that, right? So this is a good sign that 100-some thousand viewer, of course, maybe not all will be trading, but I would say the bulk of it are interested. That's the first thing, right? Not all will be interested in exporting, because I suspect that many of the people that check are more interested in e-commerce, in the digital aspect of it, which is very much driven by younger generation. So it's okay, But the main thing that they're interested. I think, referring to Robin's comment, you asked the private sector to read them. I wouldn't recommend that, because I tried to read it for 3 months. This RCEP agreement, and it's not an easy document to read. If you're not a lawyer, if you're not a trade practitioner, it is not an easy document to read. You read the first 3 pages, you just forget about it. I'm gonna go have my cappuccino, right? So this is the point that the role of the government, the role of the development partner, the role of ERIA, the role of Ministry of Commerce to step in, to try to demystify. And I like Deborah, example. And it's good to shock people a bit so that they know that it's not an easy thing, a walk in the park. RCEP is not an easy piece of instrument, right? I mean, let's bear in mind that during the negotiation, not many people knows what they negotiate about. I mean, that's the reality of it. It's a lot of secrecy in the negotiation. So unless you are in the room, you will not be privy to a lot of this discussion there, right? And I'm not privy to that, right? So King is. But for me, being I would say now I'm an outsider, try to decipher what they discussed there, it is a challenge. So I would say the role of the government, and particularly the Ministry of Commerce, who are privy to this discussion, they should make a lot of effort to reach out, to explain, to dissolve, to share the information relating to this rule origin. So I think my comment is that, look, I discourage private sector to read the agreement. Okay, I discourage them. Try to work with the chamber, could work with the Ministry of Commerce, and then have a more easy, light reading with a lot of example. That is clear. You need a lot of example. And Deborah slide presentation is to the point. Cambodia don't have 10,000 products to export. Okay, say we pick and Deborah example is a good example. She picked cookie, we have many Cambodian company who make cookie also. So how do we use this example to show, okay, this is how you move from CC to change the classification, that sort of thing, and it will be a major game changer. Bear in mind that Cambodian like to listen to story. Cambodian don't like the theoretical reading, the document, Article 3, Article 5, forget about it. They like story, they like example, they like metaphor, right? So the more you can come up with this thing would be very good, and you'll be surprised the uptake of this presentation will be very, very important. I like Robin, sharing of how the Australian private sector, how the Australian government is doing. So sharing this experience are very important because again, it's something quite concrete. Hey, this is how the Australian does. This is how the Aussies does, right? Okay, what can Cambodia do? So experience sharing is a very good example. And I like his, I don't know whether Flint or Robin, but he mentioned about, okay, I think it's Robin. They need to reach out to access to hide, specialists, advisor, custom broker, freight forwarder to advise company to on the certain product that they're exporting. Again, like I say, not every company export 1,000 products. So if you can access this expertise, your life will be easier. You just make your product, leave the rule origin to the expert, to the freight forwarder, to the custom broker. Let them handle that. And this way, that's the best way to capitalize on the rule origin, on the RCEP, right? So leave it to the expert, leave to handle that. What else? I think the outcome of the discussion today, getting the analysis of your own situation, your own product is very important, because you can present yourself as a RCEP ready company to be part of the supply chain. This is very, very important. So I would also encourage many private sector to do that, to assess your own situation and to say, okay, how can I be part of a supply chain, right? But again, I would say, at the end of the day, it's about, trying to find your own realistic, comfort zone. To say, okay, if I'm working on, say, for example, we've seen that Cambodia recently have a major investor in a rubber. He's, sort of like investing in major rubber manufacturing, right? This is a good example that, okay, now this company produce a rubber glove, rubber product, and we can export to other country, using Cambodian. In this case, more than likely, it will meet the RCEP rule origin, right? So all in all, I would say it is a big challenge for sure. But Deborah mentioned the difficulty of using ROO. But again, this difficulty are only applied to exporter, small entrepreneur. That problem can be solved just like that, if those companies would just reach out to the specialist, right? And a custom broker or freight forwarder, they can solve that, right? So that's one major problem solved on that one. So on that one, I think it's good. Public-private sector partnership is very important. The role of the chamber is very important, and definitely reaching out to development partner and specialists, think tanks to advise would be very important. Yeah. All right, that's all I have to say, Soren. Yeah.
Thank you, Your Excellency, and then we're very happy to hear that you'll be back in the motherland very soon, so we can use and abuse your time and expertise for future such workshops. So we look forward to welcoming back home.
Thank you.
With this note, very good summary of what we've discussed today. We had a few questions from the audience on whether the material would be made available to everyone. So obviously, as usual, ERIA's and Jeremy's team will be sharing the video recording and the slides on the ERIA website. So you should be receiving a message from us in the coming days with the link. I'd like to thank everyone for their time today, their participation. His Excellency Sim Sokeng for the opening remarks and for staying with us all through this event. Obviously, His Excellency Soxipana as well. We will have a series of other events on the RCEP provision. So we're trying to have one every month as from next month. And we are also doing a similar work in Laos for Lao PDR exporters and traders. So for those of you who are also interested in other markets, we'll be happy to invite you to join our dialogue in Laos. To conclude this event, I'd like to invite Mr. Jeremy Gross, Director of Capacity Building at ERIA, to give us his final remarks on this event. Thank you, Jeremy. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Sven. Well, I think I couldn't beat the articulate and erudite summary that we have already heard from Excellency Soxipana. So thank you very much for that. It is going to be a time to be creative and inventive, thinking how we can make the most, not just how we make the most of the opportunities under RCEP and not just the rules of origin chapter, but also disseminating the information, making sure people understand it and then can use it. But thank you for your summary, which really covered everything. Then Sven also covered what I was going to do, which was to thank everyone. So once again, thank you, Excellency Soxipana, Excellency Sim Sokeng, and all our expert speakers today. We really appreciate your time to join us. Also, as Sven mentioned, we do have 3 more public private dialogues planned on trade facilitation and services and investment. So please look out for the information about those, because we really hope to see you at the next work dialogues. So on that, a reminder just to stay well, stay safe. Omicron hasn't quite left us yet. So take care, and I very much look forward to seeing you in the near future. Thank you, everyone.